Veers from Gaza to Greenland, President Donald Trump appears to be redrawing the rules of power unilaterally. A US-led Gaza Board of Peace that sidelines traditional multilateralism and renewed talk of asserting American control over Greenland have rattled allies and raised a bigger question. Is Washington normalizing territorial politics once again? If the United States, in a sense, bends sovereignty to suit its own strategic convenience, does it weaken the global order it once enforced? And does also, in a way, it embolden rivals like China and Russia to do the same? As you know, friends, the United States has invited India to be part of this Gaza Board of Peace. India is now left with a piquant choice: to sign on or to risk saying no. Joining us is George Friedman, one of the world's foremost geopolitical forecasters, to assess whether this moment marks strategic realism or dangerous unilateralism. And also, of course, looking at it slightly from India's perspective. Thank you, Mr. Friedman. I want to ask you, India finds itself now in a situation where it has been invited, like a few other countries, to the Gaza Board of Peace. In the background is also a move by the Trump administration to annex Greenland, as it were. I'm not saying by force, but certainly there is a move to assert a certain territorial propriety over Greenland and, in a sense, over Gaza. How do countries like India react? Specifically, a country like India that is so close to the Gulf and obviously enjoys ties with other Gulf partners.
Well, I think what you have to understand is India itself has territorial issues with a number of countries and asserts its national interest. And that's as it should be. Your leadership does what it has to do. From the American point of view, the old world order is obsolete. The Cold War ended. The American entanglement in the Eastern Hemisphere, where we fought wars from North Korea to Vietnam to Afghanistan and so on, is not necessary. We do not have a major rival in the Soviet Union. And so we are focusing in on the United States and its interests. And its fundamental interest is in the Western Hemisphere, and to a great extent in changing an economic system internationally that was built around the Cold War, that made it very favorable for other nations to join the United States as a tool, and it's changing. Therefore, when geopolitical realities change, so do the behavior of nations, and so do principles. It's shocking because norms of the last 80 years since 1945 are being violated, but a new era is arising, and the United States, so in some ways very dramatically, wants to rush that change.
What does Greenland tell Europe about how Washington now views its allies, partners, or pressure points?
Well, there has been serious questions for many years about our alliances. Many people said outside the United States, the United States is an imperialist power. We feel that the Europeans, the EU's economy is larger than the Chinese economy, are certainly capable of caring for themselves, dealing with the Ukraine issue. We are trying to defend the hemisphere because now there's dangers of polar attacks and so on and so forth. And Greenland is important. Why he wants to own it, I must say, I don't understand. We have an alliance and it works, and the Europeans allow us full access. So that part I can't tell you. But the fact is that the old alliance system was based on the Cold War. The Cold War is over. We are in the process of evolving in the United States, and therefore, since we're the most powerful country in the world, the global system. It's going to change, and it is changing.
Now, what's funny from an Indian perspective is that Trump, for example, has invited Putin to join this Gaza Board of Peace. And also, of course, when it looks at Gaza from a unilateral prison, A, it seems to be weakening its own argument for a rule based order. And when it invites Putin, it reeks of hypocrisy because it punishes India for purchasing oil from Russia. So there is this intrinsic, weird, unilateral, hypocritical behavior.
Well, the world is reshaping itself. The anchor of the world had been, as I said, the US-Soviet rivalry. The Russians and Ukraine have shown that they are not a major military power. They have not been able to take Ukraine over the past 4 years. Therefore, we must modify our relationship. India itself has become a very important country in the world. It's no longer in any way a third world country, as we used to say. India has emerged as a powerful economic force, a significant military force, and a regional force. And therefore, it is natural that the United States would want to redefine its relationship with India. The reality of India has changed. To some extent, the reality of the world has changed. Therefore, new norms must be created. And the United States looks at India and looks at China. It does not want to have conflicts with either. One of the things that's happening now is I think the United States and China are reaching some sort of accommodation and will in the next year end the military hostility, and each side must limit the economic problems. And therefore, this moment, India is less critical. As for Putin being invited to join this Gaza thing, what can we say? I mean, when the world sees the United States opposing a country, he criticizes the United States for that. When the United States tries to make an accommodation with a country like Russia, inviting it to this, along with the Indians, it doesn't understand what's going on. I think we have to understand that the world is dramatically changing. And we say that lots of times on many things, but the geopolitical system of the world is shifting dramatically because Soviet Union is not no longer a major global power. It is a very strong regional power. China, the United States, these are the two great countries that economically and potentially militarily. So this is a new system, and the norms that are the past are obsolete.
Okay, so in this new system, when the US stretches sovereignty norms, when it eyes territory, etc., does it forfeit the moral leverage to restrain Russia or China? And are we going to see Beijing and Moscow perhaps take this as strategic permission, especially on Taiwan and even Ukraine?
I don't think the Chinese need our permission to do what they want to do, and the Russians certainly didn't need our permission to invade Ukraine. Therefore, territorialism, when you speak about it, is a commonplace thing for other nations. The United States is also practicing it. So the question then is, does China have the power, the ability, the military capability of occupying Taiwan? One of the messages of Ukraine is that great powers or the things themselves great sometimes show themselves not to be so great. After 4 years, they've only taken a fraction, Russia's only taken a fraction of Ukraine. So that's a warning to Taiwan as well as an invitation.
So let me ask you, have we entered an era where control of land, choke points, and territory matters perhaps more than institutions, especially multilateral institutions like the United Nations? Is the era of the United Nations and the Concord of Peace over now?
It never was in place. The fundamental wars that were fought between nations were rarely settled by the United Nations coming into it. The United Nations is a great idea. It was never a great power. So what I'm saying is that we have to understand that choke points and all these things were always important. During the Cold War, during the Pacific War, this is not new. The new pattern emerges where certain things are more important than others than they used to be. But on the other hand, nations always worried about territories. India always worried about security for its territory. India fought China over this question, Pakistan, and so on. So this sort of concern is not strange. It might be strange that the United States is more involved in this point, but this is a normalization of the situation.
Yes, I mean, that's the subject of this debate. Is US normalizing unilateralism? And if it ends up doing so, will that lead to a conflagration? Can this sort of so-called stability that we've seen after the Second World War sustain?
Well, that stability we've seen included many wars for the United States. It was seen as stable, but you forget how many wars from South Korea to Vietnam and so many wars in the Eastern Hemisphere the U.S. war fought. And now the United States wishes to somewhat withdraw from the world, to leave itself less responsible for the world's order and allow the world to take care of itself. So the last 80 years was not, from the American point of view, a time of orderliness. It was a time of fear of nuclear war, of hostility with the Soviet Union, with competing with the Soviet Union in the former European empires. So when we look at this period from the American point of view, it was a period of great danger and many casualties of our troops. The United States wants to withdraw from this, and that is a change in the world order, but it's also an opportunity for the Eastern Hemisphere in particular to find a new order, that the Europeans should deal with the Ukrainians, not the Americans, that the US can find an understanding with China, perhaps. So when you look at the situation, the reality has changed. The world was once anchored.
That's true. But Mr. Friedman, sorry to butt in. I just want to ask you this because it's important to this conversation. If Trump keeps pushing the envelope now, as he has in Venezuela and perhaps in Greenland, who knows, or in Gaza and this, that, the other, are we going to see China doing the same? And if so, are we going to see a world conflagration? Are we going to see some sort of a massive conflict between great powers?
I have not seen that. One of the extraordinary things in the last 80 years was there was never a war between the United States and Russia directly. It avoided it. At the same time, the question is not whether US and China, who are great powers, will be hostile, but can they form an accommodation? The United States never formed an accommodation with the Soviet Union. Therefore, the prior period was always very dangerous. The United States may be able to form an accommodation with China, and that would create some more order. So I don't see the last 80 years as very orderly from an American point of view, nor even from an Indian point of view. It was a time of evolution, change, stress. So is this. But it's now different in its appearance because the Soviet Union is no longer the major rival of the United States.
Finally, and once again, trying to circle back and elicit a very direct response, is this the start of a more dangerous world?
I have not seen it as a more dangerous world because I've seen it for the last 80 years since 1945. It's a very dangerous world. The world is continuing to be dangerous. It is the nature of nations to fight wars with each other, be afraid of each other, compete with each other, and so on. So I don't see the last period that you look back on as the way you do. I see it as a very dangerous place. I think this is somewhat less dangerous, but still there is going to be a very different change and it'll concern people.
Dr. Friedman, thank you very much for taking the time out to speak with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.